In the last lesson, we outlined the various types of ownership stakes that cap tables keep track of. We talked about common shares, preferred shares, convertible notes, safes, and stock options. My name's Safe. I'm a product marketer here at Carta, and in this lesson, we're going to take a step back and learn why it's important that cap tables keep track of all this info. Ready? Let's dive in. Before we get started, let me level set real quick. We're about to talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but if you only remember one thing, let it be this. Different types of equity all come with different rules, and those rules help to dictate how you'll issue shares, track them, and manage them on your cap table. Common shares and preferred shares are the simplest. They represent actual shares in a company with an actual price attached to each share. Convertible instruments, like notes and safes, are not actual shares. They allow investors to get shares later at a price that hasn't been decided yet. And stock options are also not shares. Like convertibles, they enable employees to buy shares at a later time. But the difference is the price of those shares has already been decided and locked in. So as you could see, we've got several different kinds of equity here. Some kinds are shares, while others are just agreements to transfer shares later. Some already have a share price attached to them, and others don't. But the one thing they all have in common is that each of them has specific rules and nuances that you need to be aware of as a founder. All of this to say, if you have a messy cap table that you're not consistently updating, or worse, you don't have a cap table at all, just trust me, this whole thing is going to be chaos. It can cost a whole lot of money and time to try to untangle all of it, especially if it gets out of your control. So, let's now dive into how the cap table keeps some of these elements organized. We'll start with an important question. When does ownership of shares actually take effect? You're going to start seeing a pattern here. For some types of equity, the answer is easy, and for others, it's a little more complex. When investors put their money into a company, remember, they typically get preferred shares. Those shares belong to them immediately. But like we talked about in the last lesson, convertible instruments aren't so simple. Think of them like delayed shares. Stakeholders will receive shares at some point in the future according to really specific rules that dictate when they will receive them and how much those shares will cost. What about your employees? Typically, the majority of names on your cap table will be people who actually work for your company. As part of their compensation package, they receive something called stock options. So let's run through what stock options are and how they work. Stock options are not shares. That's the key thing to know. Think of them like a contract that gives an employee the option to buy shares at a later date. Essentially, what you're doing is locking in a share price today while the share price is hopefully really low. And then you're promising the employee, hey, I'll give you the ability to buy some of these shares at this low price. High level, especially in the startup world, employees tend to look for companies that they think they'll continue to grow in the future. Because they're hoping for the company to be a rocket ship and it does really, really well, and then their share price goes much higher and they would get super rich. So, naturally, if I can lock in my share price at like 5 cents today, that's a pretty sweet deal. Hopefully in a year or two from now, the share price will go up $1, $2, $3, $4. But since I'm locked in my share price at 5 cents, I can still buy them for super cheap. But, okay, now here's the question. When can your employees actually buy their shares? Is it all at once, little by little? What's that structure like? This leads us to one of the most important things that your cap table is going to keep organized: vesting schedules. All right, let's pretend you hire someone, give them all their shares right away, day one. A week goes by, they decide this is not working out for them, they leave. Huge bummer. You basically just gave away a whole bunch of shares in your company to someone who didn't even stick around. This is exactly why vesting exists. When you hire someone, you want to incentivize them to stay around, help your company be successful. Vesting is one of the ways you could do that. Basically, vesting is the process of earning an asset, stock options in this case, over a certain period of time. And a vesting schedule is how you track the distribution of shares over that time. To put it simply, it determines exactly when an employee will be able to get their stock. Let's take a look at an example. A typical option grant would normally play out like this. You hire an employee, and part of their total comp, you've given them 10,000 stock options at the set price of $1 per share. The $1 figure is what we call the strike price, aka exercise price. Essentially, you're promising the employee that when they become eligible to buy their shares, that's the price they'll be able to buy them at. So at this point, both you and your employees are hoping that the company's going to grow in value over time and the shares will someday be worth a whole lot more money. But remember, right now, the employee doesn't own those shares. Instead, those shares are going to fully vest over a period of 4 years. Here's how that looks. On the 1-year anniversary of getting hired, the employee is going to suddenly become eligible to buy a quarter of their shares, which is about $2,500 in this case, for the strike price of $1 a share. When they officially buy these shares, that's what we call exercising their options. So when you hear people use the phrase, "I'm exercising my options," that's what they mean, "I'm buying my shares." From that point forward, the employee is going to become eligible to buy more and more shares at regular intervals, typically monthly, sometimes even quarterly. This goes on and on and on until the 4th anniversary of the employee's hire, at which point they're now eligible to exercise all of the remaining options, still for the price of $1. At this point, this is what we call fully vested. It's important to keep something in mind. Employees aren't really required to buy any of these shares. You're just giving them the option to buy them. So, some of them will choose to buy them, some of them choose to buy some of them might not buy any of them at all. It's really up to them. Remember that 1-year waiting period you set before the employee can get their first portion of their options? That's what we call a 1-year cliff. Typically, after that first year, the vesting schedule changes from a 1-year waiting period to mostly a month-by-month waiting period. What this means is employees don't have to wait until the 2nd anniversary of their employment to exercise the next quarter of their shares. Instead, they become vested in additional shares month after month after month. So on month 13 and month 14, they get a little bit more. Companies do this for a few reasons, but mainly they want employees to stay there for a significant amount of time, usually about a year. After that, people start receiving shares. So once that cliff has been climbed, employees can now exercise their options more frequently. Think of it as a reward for staying at the startup and helping it grow. All these vesting rules are just examples of time-based vesting, which is exactly what it sounds like. The vesting schedule is linked to the length of time an employee has been at the company. Some vesting schedules are what we call milestone-based, a little bit different. These are linked to reaching specific business goals, sales targets, someone doing really well at their job. Honestly, those are much less common, but they do exist. There are also hybrid plans that combine both time-based and milestone-based vesting. Keep in mind, companies can make multiple option grants to the same employee, and each grant will have a separate vesting schedule. Let's use an example. Let's say you have an employee that you gave a second option grant 2 years into their employment. You gave them the option to buy more shares at a different strike price. Then that grant will follow its own vesting schedule. Just something to keep in mind because you're going to have to keep track of it on your cap table. Stock options don't live on forever, though. They can expire if they're left unexercised, even if the employee is still at the company. Typically, the expiration period is about 10 years. It's usually detailed in the stock option agreement between the company and the employee. So what happens when an employee leaves a company without exercising some or all of their shares? In short, the employee gives up the right to purchase any shares that have invested. Those unvested shares are then returned to the company's option pool where they can be given to other shareholders or new employees. Now, one important thing, employees who leave a company typically still have a window to exercise any of the remaining vested shares. This is called the post-termination exercise period, or PTEP. And if the shares are still unexercised after that window, they expire and get put back into the option pool.